Welcome to Story Mix, your home for the most captivating and thrilling stories. Today, we dive into one of New York City's most incredible crime sagas. How did an ordinary dealer rise to become the kingpin of a massive mafia empire? And how did he build a fortune worth millions from seemingly insignificant car parts? Get ready to uncover how Maurizio used his cunning and skills to create a massive empire from stolen airbags, and how his story ended in a shocking twist. From clever schemes to the final arrest, join us on this suspenseful journey filled with drama and intrigue. Our story takes place in the 1990s, a time when New York City was grappling with a massive car theft problem. In a previous video, we explored the story of a Chinese intelligence officer who became the biggest car thief in America, specifically in New York. However, he wasn't the only one in the business. Today's story takes place 5 years before his in the early 90s. At the time, there were criminal gangs and organizations that focused entirely on cars. Imagine that in New York alone, more than 150,000 cars were stolen every year. The thefts varied. Some would steal the entire car, while others would break in and take specific parts, targeting the most valuable ones. However, some valuable car parts were overlooked by the thieves because they didn't realize their true worth. You might wonder how specialized car thieves could miss the value of some parts. The answer is that this particular part didn't just have monetary value, but a secret value that wasn't discovered at the time. This part's value would later be recognized by a man named Maurizio Berkan. He would go on to establish the largest empire for selling stolen car parts. Maurizio was of Italian descent, and his family had immigrated to America in search of a better life. Naturally, we all know that Italian immigrants in America are often associated with the largest mafia organizations and criminal networks. Maurizio grew up in mafia communities, which, like ordinary societies, had different layers. There were the low-level gangsters who carried out the dirty work, such as theft, robbery, kidnapping, and even murder. Then, there were those in higher ranks, like the minor bosses who sometimes posed as businessmen. At the top were the mafia leaders, the ones with the most power and wealth. The world of organized crime is structured in layers. The higher you go, the richer and more powerful you become. Those at the bottom always aspire to rise to the top. Maurizio came from the very bottom, a poor family with no resources or support. He had to build himself from scratch. He began by engaging in dirty work, stealing, looting, and selling stolen goods to higher-ups or traders. During this period, he kept his eyes wide open, observing what was most in demand in the market, what fetched the highest prices, and what was the easiest to steal. He even mingled with the children of bosses and traders, engaging them in conversation to learn how the trade worked. Eventually, Maurizio decided to focus on the car parts business because he saw it as a lucrative field and believed it suited his abilities. He began to understand how the business operated. Determined to move up the ranks, he started buying car parts from thieves, becoming familiar with which parts were most in demand and which yielded the highest profit margins. In the beginning, he would sell the parts out of his car's trunk, almost like a mobile shop. Imagine, a part that he bought for $10, he could sell for $100. The profit margin was huge. His business quickly grew, his wealth increased, and by 1994, he opened a shop. This shop provided him with a legal front, making his business easier to manage. Before that, he was buying and selling on the streets, constantly exposed to danger. Those involved in mafias and organized crime know that the first step to success in the criminal world is to establish a legitimate storefront or legal front, allowing you to operate more comfortably. Maurizio opened an auto parts workshop. To make the shop appear more credible, he also bought legitimate parts from established companies. That way, if the police or any authorities ever inspected the shop, they would find real parts, invoices, and transactions with reputable companies. there would be no reason to suspect him. Once he had established a legal front and protected himself from the front, he knew he had to pay attention to the back end. In the world of mafias, there's always someone above you, and if you want to operate comfortably in a certain area or business, like the car parts business, you have to pay the price. Maurizio was well aware of how things worked in the underworld, so he always made sure to stay on good terms with those above him. He made regular payments to the mafia. These payments weren't just for protection, but served as a kind of insurance that guaranteed his safety under the watchful eye of the boss who controlled the area. That's how organized crime operates, which is why it's called organized crime. Maurizio's business continued to flourish and grow, and he strengthened his relationships with the smaller thieves. His keen eye was always focused on valuable parts, those that had high profit margins and were in high demand. Eventually, he stumbled upon the part that would change his life forever, propelling him from a small-time trader to someone closely associated with the mafia bosses. This part, which most of you probably wouldn't expect, was the airbag, the inflatable safety cushion that deploys during an accident. It was this very part that would make Maurizio one of the wealthiest mafia-affiliated traders, amassing a fortune of over $60 million. You might find it hard to believe that a part like the airbag could generate such wealth, but let me explain how. Maurizio noticed that airbags were one of the easiest parts for thieves to steal from cars. A thief could steal an airbag in less than a minute. The airbag was also small and could easily be hidden in a bag, making it possible to steal large quantities in a short time. For instance, if you were in a parking lot with 30 cars, you could steal all the airbags from those cars in less than half an hour. In contrast, stealing an entire car or larger parts took more time and effort. Additionally, tracking stolen airbags was much harder than tracking stolen cars or larger parts. At the time, airbags didn't have serial numbers, making them impossible to trace after being stolen. They were also easy to hide and store due to their small size. Most importantly, they were incredibly valuable. The price of a single airbag could range from $1,000 to $2,000, sometimes even more, and money back then was worth twice what it is today. All these factors made the airbag the perfect item for Maurizio to build his fortune upon. There was also an additional advantage to the airbag trade, something even Maurizio himself wasn't aware of at first, an advantage that would elevate his business to new heights, but we'll talk about that later. The first thing Maurizio did was study and learn everything he could about airbags, the different types and how to dismantle and install them. Then, he formed his own group of thieves, carefully selecting the members himself, mostly from the small-time criminals he had met over the years. He picked the best of them and recruited them into his crew, teaching them how to quickly and professionally remove airbags from cars. The thieves began working, collecting airbags from vehicles and bringing them to the shop. From the very start, Maurizio knew the airbag business would be a massive success. The quantities his crew brought in were enormous. There was also huge demand for airbags. Maurizio's customers were primarily mechanics and auto repair shop owners. Airbags would come and go quickly. Maurizio made sure to pay his thieves generously, understanding that their loyalty depended on the money he gave them. Despite this, his profit margin was astronomical. He paid about $200 for each airbag and sold them for $1,000 to $2,000 or even more. However, New York police began to notice that reports of stolen airbags were increasing at an unusual rate. They were puzzled by this new trend. They would respond to theft reports, inspect the cars, and find that the vehicles were mostly intact, except for the missing airbags. At first, they didn't understand what was happening. But after some investigations, they began to unravel the mystery. Since airbags didn't have serial numbers, they couldn't be tracked. And because they were small and easy to steal quickly, it was difficult to catch thieves in the act. Once the police discovered that airbags were selling for $1,000 to $2,000 or more, it became clear to them that an organized operation was behind these thefts. Even when they finally caught some of the thieves stealing airbags, the thieves refused to confess when questioned about who was behind the operation or who was paying them. They claimed they were working alone, knowing that stealing airbags was considered a minor crime. As a result, they would spend only a few hours in jail and then be released after paying a fine. There was no serious punishment, so they never revealed who was pulling the strings. Meanwhile, airbag thefts continued to spread across New York, increasing daily. Thousands of airbags were being stolen every year. The problem had become widespread, leaving the police bewildered and unable to track down the mastermind. On the other side, Maurizio was living the dream to its fullest extent. Imagine that his thieves had stolen such massive quantities of airbags that he no longer had space to store them. So, he decided to open a large workshop called All-in-One. This workshop served as a huge warehouse, with one part dedicated to storing spare parts and airbags, and the other part functioning as a workshop. Instead of just selling airbags to mechanics and repair shop owners, Maurizio began replacing or selling them directly to people, allowing him to earn even higher profits. He even began offering shipping services for airbags across the entire United States. If you lived on the other side of the country and needed an airbag, your order would arrive quickly. The amusing part was that he started advertising his company, calling himself the Airbag King. He placed ads in magazines, newspapers, and even online, despite the internet being relatively new at that time. Naturally, all of this caused his business to thrive, and money started flowing in the millions. He reached a point where he didn't even know what to do with all this money. At this stage, he started fearing financial scrutiny. If authorities decided to investigate his massive income sources, he might face problems. So, Maurizio decided to hire an expert accountant to manage his financial records and make everything appear legitimate. Maurizio had a girlfriend named Ellen, whom he had known since high school. Ellen was an experienced accountant, so he offered her a job as his company's accountant. When Ellen saw the financial records, she sensed something shady and realized that the business was not clean. Once Maurizio realized that Ellen understood the situation, he confessed the truth to her and told her that all she had to do was organize the records and make the financial transactions look legal. Ellen was hesitant at first, but Maurizio tempted her with a generous salary, and she eventually agreed. One of the pieces of advice she gave him was to start using checks, as checks add more legitimacy to a business. Maurizio began paying his employees and even the thieves with checks. Instead of cash flowing directly through him, it now flowed through the company checks, making things appear more legal. Maurizio then decided to distance himself from the dirty side of the business. Instead of managing the thieves himself, he promoted 3 of them to become his close aides, who then took over managing the rest of the thieves and the criminal side of things. Maurizio limited himself to overseeing from above. The business was running perfectly. Even if he received an order for a specific type of airbag and didn't have it in stock, the gang of thieves would steal it the same day. Fast service, even better than the agencies. Maurizio operated under the motto, "Customer satisfaction is our goal." Imagine that you could have your car's airbag stolen at night and then go the next morning to replace it at Maurizio's workshop itself. This was an additional advantage that even Maurizio hadn't anticipated. He was creating the problem and solving it himself. Supply and demand were under his control, as if he had a money-making machine that never stopped. Due to the overwhelming success of his company, Maurizio received the Dealer of the Year award, and he appeared to everyone as a self-made man who succeeded in legitimate business. His wealth made him one of the richest figures in the organized crime world in New York. He bought luxurious houses and expensive cars and lived a life of luxury. But he wasn't satisfied with just wealth. He was also seeking respect and status. In the mafia world, you typically gain such status only if you're part of the boss's family. Maurizio, coming from a poor background, wanted to become part of a mafia boss's family. He got close to Carol Montana, the daughter of one of the mafia bosses. Most likely, he was seeking her status more than her beauty. He also befriended her father, who admired Maurizio and his success and agreed to their engagement, making them fiancés. Maurizio felt he had achieved everything: wealth, a fiancé, and status. But in the world of crime, even when things seem rosy, they can turn into a nightmare at any moment. The police arrested one of Maurizio's thieves. You might wonder, where's the problem? Wasn't the thief just going to spend a few hours in jail and then be released with a fine as usual? Unfortunately, this time, the thief wasn't caught stealing an airbag, but was apprehended while assaulting someone in an attempted robbery, a serious crime that could lead to harsh punishment. The thief was willing to do anything to avoid trouble. When he learned that the police were going to investigate Maurizio's airbag empire, he decided to strike a deal with them. He offered to reveal everything he knew about Maurizio and his company, all in one, in exchange for having the charges against him dropped. The police agreed, and the thief provided them with all the details, exposing the entire operation. There was a surveillance team from the police stationed outside Maurizio's workshop, and they immediately noticed people entering the workshop with large bags and leaving without them. The police suspected these bags contained the stolen airbags and began preparing to set up a sting operation. However, Maurizio was one step ahead. He was extremely cautious and had installed surveillance cameras around the workshop building from all angles, allowing him to spot the van where the officers were hiding. The first thing Maurizio did was to call his assistants and order them to stop delivering stolen parts to the workshop. Then, the investigators tried to follow him in their car, but Maurizio was alert and realized he was being tracked. To confirm, he executed a simple maneuver by turning his car right 3 times. This maneuver helps detect if a car is following you. If a car turns behind you 3 times in the same direction, it means it's tracking you. Indeed, the investigators realized Maurizio had figured out they were following him. Consequently, he became even more cautious and instructed his assistants to store the stolen airbags in another location away from the workshop. The police investigations continued for months without yielding sufficient evidence to charge Maurizio. They even tried sending an undercover officer with an airbag to sell it to Maurizio, but he refused to buy from him. Maurizio didn't buy from strangers. He relied only on his team of thieves and did not deal with any thieves outside his circle. Despite the police's ongoing attempts to infiltrate his small circle, Maurizio remained vigilant and did not allow anyone to enter his team easily. The investigations lasted a year and a half without them managing to catch him. In 1997, the Japanese company Honda began adding serial numbers to the airbags in their cars, a development that greatly aided the police in tracking stolen parts. The investigators started focusing on the new Honda vehicles. Whenever an airbag was stolen, they would take the serial number and add it to a special list of all stolen airbag serial numbers. Later, they contacted Maurizio's company, All in One, and requested to purchase airbags from new Honda models with stolen serial numbers. When the parts arrived, they discovered that one of them was indeed stolen. This was the first strong piece of evidence in the case after a year and a half of investigations. But they needed more evidence. They didn't want to arrest Maurizio and his gang without being sure that the evidence they had would be enough to dismantle his empire. Therefore, they obtained a search warrant that allowed them to inspect the packages Maurizio's company was sending across the United States. This warrant allowed them to open the packages, check their contents, then reseal and send them as if they had not been inspected. Thus, they discovered large quantities of stolen airbags that Maurizio's company was trading. They confirmed that some of them were stolen, which strengthened the evidence against Maurizio. Not only that, but they also decided to check the company's financial records. These records led them to the check company that Maurizio used to pay his employees and the thieves working for him. The check company kept images of every financial transaction, including pictures of the people who received the money. And here was the shocker. All members of Maurizio's gang were listed in the financial records, and their photos were with the check company. This confirmed that Maurizio was dealing directly with the thieves, giving the police the final evidence they needed. After 18 months of investigation, it was time to arrest him. The police went to Maurizio's home with a court-issued search warrant, allowing them to raid and search the entire house. When they arrived, they broke down the door and started searching the rooms. But the surprise was that the house was completely empty. There was no one there. This made them anxious and worried that Maurizio might have learned about the arrest operation and managed to escape. But during the search, they noticed a table with Maurizio's wedding gifts and discovered that he had recently married and was on his honeymoon with his wife in one of the Hawaiian islands. On the table, there was a guest list for the wedding, which included the names of mafia bosses and some well-known figures in the organized crime world. There were also phone numbers of Maurizio's parents, so the investigators decided to contact his mother. One of the investigators called Maurizio's mother and informed her that her son's house had been robbed and that they needed to get in touch with him. She gave them his phone number in Hawaii. After contacting him, they were able to track his location at a resort on Maui Island in Hawaii. They reached out to the FBI office in Hawaii, which acted quickly and went to the resort. They raided Maurizio's room and arrested him in the middle of his honeymoon. From that moment on, the airbag empire crumbled. During the years Maurizio operated, it was estimated that he and his gang had stolen between 40,000 to 50,000 airbags. His personal fortune from these operations was estimated at $60 million, a huge sum at that time. In the end, most of his assets and money were seized, and he was sentenced to 10 years in prison for money laundering and conspiracy to commit thefts. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more gripping tales, make sure to subscribe to Story Mix and hit that like button. Your support helps us bring more incredible stories to life. Don't forget to share this video with friends and drop your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing from you. Stay tuned for our next story. We promise it will be just as thrilling and captivating. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time with another unforgettable story.